we're really excited, Jess, to see how this mentoring session might actually be helpful to you, and you'll be able to share during the course of the week what it is that has, what's triggered for you in your learning, what you're thinking about in terms of your practices and strategies as a result of that. I'm Sarah Smuts-Kennedy. I'm the vision holder for the Love of Bees, who's the umbrella for the Regenerate Now program. I'm also a co-founder with these other wonderful people, Bailey, Levi and Daniel of the Urban Farmers Alliance. This is part of our free educational online platform that is part of our strategy to enable people who want to learn organic regenerative practices to get access to this information in a way that we think will enable them to start really great farms, mitigate climate change, feed their local communities, and enable them to create local employment. So really happy to be here today. Levi, do you want to introduce yourself?
Kia ora. My name's Levi. I'm the head farmer at Organic Market Garden, OMG, up in Auckland here. We do a CSA vegetable box scheme, and we service like a very hyper-local community, as well as I take in a lot of volunteers and teach stuff. Really excited to be here, and really excited to see everything that's happened down at the Bowling Greens. I think I remember Zooming it with Jordan and Tim and Jaden and Richard back in very early days when they were just installing the compost boxes. So it's going to be awesome to see what you've done, Jess.
Good evening, everybody, or good afternoon. My name is Daniel Sherman. I'm a trustee for the Love of Bees, and I'm a biological agronomist. I work from all over the country, helping all sorts of different growers understand their soils and their crops from all aspects. I actually visited the site and met, I think, with Ian. He may remember looking at their compost boxes.
Yes.
Quite, I think, long before. I think at that time they just started setting up the beds. So it'll be really interesting, Jess and Ian, to see how you progress since I was last there.
Super.
So if you guys like to introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Sure. Go.
Right.
Go for it.
Go for it. Hi. Well, my name's Ian. I'm Jaden from For the Better Good, Jaden's father, and got involved with it obviously with Jaden's passion with the bottle and the composting ability. So I'm a learner. I'm learning every day from great people like Richard Wallace from OMG. He's been a great support network for me, and so yeah, we came across to try and find some land for the composting and to put the boxes from New Zealand Box, and knowing the people that run Wellfed here in Porirua, Wellington, this land became available, the Bowling Green of Hampshire Street. So yeah, soil testing went underway. We experimented with digging into the Bowling Green and then building on top, and yeah, there was lots of physical work to start with, but really excited now to be doing the composting and learning every day.
Yes. Kia ora koutou. My name is Jess. I'm the manager of the garden here at Hampshire. I joined in October of last year, actually after I came for a visit. It would have been May, I think, of last year to come see the Compost Bins, and I met Ian and kind of saw what they were doing. I was really excited because I had done urban farming back in Canada with Fresh City Farms, which is actually the biggest urban farm in Canada now, which is pretty cool. And when I saw what was happening here, I was really excited. And then, I left, that conversation ended. And then I think 4 months later, Ian sent a really cryptic email saying, "Can you call me?" Period. No information. And he's like, "Oh, we got a grant. Do you want to be the manager?" I said, "Yes." And I quit my job the next day, and now I'm here. And like Ian said, it's learning every day and learning on a really unique ground, just because it is a sports field. It's a layer of topsoil, about 30 centimeters topsoil with sand and gravel for another meter, and then clay. So it's an interesting space to work with, where you don't have those like typical layers of soil that you would have in a normal patch of ground. So we've been learning a lot with that. When we do the tour, we'll show you our various stages of learning how to build beds. And I think we're starting to get it, which is great. So shall we start with the compost bins?
Yeah.
Show a tour? Okay, I'm gonna actually turn this around so you're not just in my face as we walk over. So we have 10 bins now?
Yeah.
10 bins.
Yep.
And we're going to have a total of 30 going all the way down to the end of the bowling green, which is an enormous capacity for taking food waste. Ian, maybe you want to talk about where we get our food waste from and what we're composting.
Yeah, so I've got a relationship with Pack and Save here in Porirua, so I fight with the pig farmer to collect bins from them, but great relationship. So the bins are similar as to what you see here, so they are full of food waste, and I bring them up here, and obviously a mixture of gathering leaves and lawn clippings and coffee husks from Mojo, a great relationship with Mojo. So we get coffee husks from them and grinds. We've been recently shredding coffee cups as well from Wellington Airport. So using that as a carbon base as well. So for me, having Richard down here and learning from him, Levi, and I remember that Zoom call early in the piece. Yeah, it's a mixture. I use these bins here to mix my carbon. So I put all my coffee husks and coffee cup and grinds and everything else in there. And also very important to us is shredding of Jaden's plant-based better bottles as well. So we shred those and we put that in the mix as well to monitor the breakdown. We're just recently doing a bit of a trial with Whittaker's as well. Whittaker's have just produced a compostable wrapper. So they've asked us to help experiment with the breaking down of that, and it's looking really positive. So over to the bins. Some have got the lids. We're still waiting for lids to arrive, but we're getting our bins up to 65, 68 degrees, which is really good. And as you can see there, we originally started using wood chip, and we found that we were sort of sifting it. We found it was very, very labor intensive, and it was still too woody for the product that was produced. So we've now gone into leaves and more lawnmower clippings and etc. But it's about getting the right lawnmower clippings to make sure they're not obviously saturated with poisons. So but this is working well. A lot of seaweed from the beaches close by, which is really positive. So yeah, we've got some good worm activity going on, Jess, haven't we?
We do, yeah. It's really been noticing a difference, and that's been really exciting to kind of have a really good quality compost to be adding to our beds.
So for me, it's a great learning curve. It's we're finding that the bottles themselves are breaking down within 27 days. Which is fantastic for
really been noticing. That's really exciting to kind of have a really good quality compost to be adding to our beds.
So for me, it's a great learning curve. It's
a lot of feedback.
Yeah, we are, Jess. If you've got two recordings going at the same time in the same space, we'll get a funny feedback loop. So you might be better just to have the one.
I only have my one phone.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what that was.
Okay, that's weird. I'm not sure what was happening there. Okay.
So I wanted to ask you, Daniel, whether there was whether we could have a conversation around innovations around the composting. Have you been trialing at all, Ian, the BAM, the anaerobic beneficial microbes at all?
We haven't been trying out BAM yet.
No.
That is a conversation I was hoping we could have, and how it would fit into our system, and what benefit we would get from it. We use biochar in our compost, but that's kind of our only other additive.
Question: how? So you put your compost in, and then it comes out at the other end. before you put it on your beds, are you leaving it to mature at all? Or does it just...
Yeah. So we're typically giving it, because, like, in all honesty, some of our compost went on too early. Like, that was definitely a learning. In an effort to kind of get everything going, we were a little hasty and put it on too early. So these are probably our most recent bins that will have that time to actually cure rather than going right on. I've been using cover crops to kind of fill some of those roles that compost was doing. So yeah, that's something that we're going to get better at.
Yeah, because very soon, I imagine with 30 boxes, you will be producing a lot. And what we do at the farm is I never take it straight out of those boxes because they've just been turned, and fungi especially need to not be turned, and the pile needs to rest there for a long period of time. I like to leave it resting for at least 2 months before I use it. And that stage is when we actually put it into a big ton bag, though you don't need that. You can just pile it up. We inoculate the whole thing with BAM and we cover it up and just forget about it. And honestly,
so you put the BAM after it's when it's curing.
I don't put BAM in when we're turning it. I put BAM in right at the end and basically inoculate that with the spray tack. Get someone on that job while you're laying it down. Make sure you get all your moisture levels right. And then you leave it in a big pile there, and basically you just let it cure. And what you'll see is it will turn into a farm of invertebrates and worms, and it will just be crawling. And the quality of your compost changes from like an all right compost to an incredible compost. Straight casting. It's that last step that really does separate out the good compost.
So I'm interested to hear, Daniel, your thoughts on that, because obviously I'm inoculating my compost as I go. What are your thoughts on that, Daniel?
If you're looking at the best outcome in terms of looking for capturing the most amount of carbon and gaining the greatest amount of, or the best fungal to bacterial ratio over a period of time, essentially the secret is the less you turn it, the better. Now, under a completely facultative...
Can you explain what facultative means? So
facultative otherwise could be called fermentative, but using facultative anaerobes, they survive in both aerobic and anaerobic conditions, but they don't produce methane like what we think of in terms of anaerobes, which is where the BAM type inoculum comes into the process. So what you're looking at is that when you gain out of the process by inoculating at the beginning of the process is you gain the opportunity of not having to turn the compost pile, preferably at all, or at most once. So it saves a huge amount of labour. The key to getting it to work right, and this is where a lot of people have played around with it so far, probably haven't quite got it right, is you need to get a really good coverage of the microbes on the material. So you don't just fill the box and then just like pour it over with a watering can. You have to be spraying it on each layer as you add it in. So the greater the coverage that you get over the surface area of the ingredients in the compost, the more effective that process happens. Now, the beginning, when you initially close the box up, you will get the normal thermophilic rise. So you'll get it to go to that 65, even 75 degrees because that oxygen, but once the oxygen's used up, ordinarily the temperature will start to fall. And as the facultative process kicks in, you're generally looking to see it, it's a little bit different depending on external temperatures have a big effect on here. So it could range anywhere between 35 to 55 degrees as an ongoing process. The other really interesting benefit you get from it is the fact that every time you turn it, you lose carbon, right? So if you leave a pile exposed and uncovered, it's losing carbon because it is transpiring. Organisms, any of the aerobic organisms particularly the bacteria when they're transpiring, actually release an awful lot of carbon into the air. That's why your pile gets smaller and smaller and smaller if you leave it there. It's basically going through that carbon process where the aerobic organisms are essentially breathing out CO2, and you're losing that carbon into the atmosphere. So the idea of that facultative process is that we maximize the carbon. So the difference can be, and some of the figures I've seen recently would talk about 40% difference in carbon sequestration between those processes. And that's between a static aerobic pile and a static anaerobic system. So when you're turning it, the difference is potentially much larger still. So you could be talking 50–60% difference in carbon saving at the end of the process. So you have obviously that much more compost to sell at the end of the process if you work that properly. Even in a box that's designed for an aerobic system, the facultative anaerobes is still inside the vast majority of that box is still going to be aerobic, which is why you have to keep turning it to keep it aerobic. So when you have it inoculated with those facultators, that's what stops you from having to turn that compost. One last thing I will say is that the facultative process, and this actually came recently confirmed by Jerry Gillespie, who is probably one of the world authorities in regards to commercial composting, and particularly this facultative process, which he calls spice composting, kind of. I can't remember what SPICE stands for now. But he also confirmed with me that the carbon to nitrogen ratio of this type of facultative pile can be as low as 20:1. They can actually manage a lot. You need a lot less carbon to process the nitrogen than you normally do. And because of that, if that compost, if that is in contact with the soil, you get fungal activity because you're not breaking it every time you're not turning it. And you get that worm life and everything happening there at the early stages. So what Levi is describing is certainly a viable method of utilising that facultative process. But if you embrace it from the beginning of the process, there are still other advantages to be gained out of it.
Well, it's interesting. I was going to
Spices, static pile. What is
inoculated.
That? Yeah, compost.
Inoculated compost extension. Yeah.
If I just go back, Daniel, to that, talk a little bit more about that process of actually inoculating every little bit of it, because I think a lot of people have tried. A lot of people also just put in a watering can, do it here and there.
So when you look at what Jerry suggests, and typically they would have, in a commercial sense, they would spread it all out. And interestingly enough, they don't mulch. In fact, they avoid mulching as much as they actually believe there's less mulching required with his fermentative process anyway, or the facultative process. But they spread it all out, and they actually stand there with a sprayer, as in like physically spraying it. I suspect that in a box situation, instead of having a watering can, to have like a 5 or 10 litre sprayer standing there that's actually mixed up with like a 10:1 solution. The interesting thing as well is that I have been led to believe in many documents they talk about needing 1 litre of BAM to 1 cubic metre of compost. But he is actually talking potentially that actually being, if you spread it evenly by spraying it, you could actually get as far as 10 cubic metres with that 1 litre of BAM. So it's a matter of having enough water to get that, but spraying it in a fine mist. You think of coverage of a leaf of a watering can versus actually spraying it. The processes are quite different. So that's where I'm talking about getting the maximum amount of compost. I mean, I guess you could soak it. There would be ways of almost bathing it in a solution and pouring it in, but on a commercial scale, they're usually spraying it.
Yeah, that's what we do, and I always get a volunteer when we're doing that final turn into a pile to go to that last curing stage. I always get a person just on that job, and when the person does it, I tell them to sort of fluff it up and push it all around in the air, which means that it's just getting really good coverage. Yeah.
So do you have any questions, Ian or Jess, around potentially implementing that?
Well, the question that I was going to ask was, how many times should I be turning it? And I think, Daniel, you've just given me some answers there. Because I was really conscious of just aerating it and turning it and getting the sort of bottom layer up to the top.
The answer, Ian, in a traditional sense, if you were doing strictly aerobic composting, every time the temperature goes over 65 degrees, you're actually supposed to turn it to drop the temperature.
Sure.
That's
what I'd be, yeah.
And if you haven't inoculated it with, for argument's sake, a BAM type of inoculum, then the fermentative process will become a methane and a very, very smelly process. So you get sulfur and methane being produced out of it. As soon as you inoculate it, you stop the smell. It's actually incredibly effective in sewage situations, actually, to remove the smell. They just take over that process completely. But the other argument is, if you do aerobic, there's a thing called static pile aerobic composting. And obviously that's building a pile, you might force oxygen through it, but essentially the reason that every time you turn it, you break up the fungal hyphae in the system, and what you end up producing at the end is a compost that almost invariably lacks fungi. And when we start seeing that compost going down on the soil, and we can discuss it later when we talk about soil analysis, we can actually see the net result of that on most of the farms that are using either commercial compost or compost on this aerated aerobic piles that are turned all the time. They all lack fungi.
I think the big thing with me as well was just, and still is, gauging the balance between nitrogen and carbon. Like, how much food waste do I put in machete up? Am I going too thick on that layer, or am I not going enough carbon? That's a trial for me at the moment. Yeah,
the carbon to nitrogen ratio is a really big issue that we see with composting. And I know Sheldon from Kai Cycle there that we talked about building, and he has been developing a compost calculator. So you could take a group of inputs and it would give you a carbon to nitrogen ratio, because like you said, initials are interesting. You talked about wood chip. Wood chip can have a 500 to 1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. So you can imagine that when you've got food waste already has a 15 to 1 typical carbon to nitrogen ratio. If you add even a tiny bit of wood chip, you're just adding way too, you can easily overdo the carbon component. And when you finish the composting, when all the nitrogen's gone and you've still got lots of uncomposted carbon, the simple answer is we started with too much carbon in the recipe. And when you've got something like coffee chaff, for argument's sake, I think the carbon to nitrogen ratio from coffee chaff, I have seen that, but you're talking like even sawdust, you're down to 200 to 1. Or even 150 to 1, I think. I can't remember exactly what coffee chaff was, but something like that means, again, it becomes quite a different calculation if you're talking. It's just not as simple as 1 shovel of this and 2 shovels of that, or 1 bucket of this and 1 bucket of that. It depends what's in the bucket.
Yeah, Levi, you're using a lot of dried lawn clippings.
Yeah, I find that the best, man. Dried lawn clippings, leaves. And the other thing is as well with the leaves as well that I find is that they do attract a lot more fungi breaking them down, but they break down much faster than wood chips.
Yeah.
Daniel, do you want to explain why there would be more fungi when he's using leaves?
I mean, you've got a whole process with leaves where you're starting with a really good inoculum source. Oh, we've lost Jess. Back again.
No, they're there.
Whereas often wood chip, if it sits there for a long time, I mean, that's the other thing, wood chip often needs to be aged to be any use. Fresh wood chip, that sort of stuff, it actually wants to sit there often for probably at least 2 or 3 months, potentially being inoculated with fungi in a partial process. But when you're starting with leaves, you're starting with generally something that has a huge amount of inoculum actually in that. And obviously you've got something that's got, I can't remember again what off the top of my head all the carbon and nitrogen ratios are, but leaves are a lot lower in that process. So you're starting with something that's got a lot less carbon to break down in the beginning as well. But it's really about the inoculum that comes with the leaf process.
Sure.
So I'm thinking that we're at 4:25, and I'm wondering, Ian, if you might have one more question, and then I think we should move across to the farm. And I think the compost to the garden bed is a great story, because you can't do no-till farming. without compost. So there's a really great opportunity to just talk about how that material then is actually arriving in the garden beds.
Sure. Jess is just heading to get her laptop because her phone is just dropping away. So she's just getting that. I suppose for me, the question I have is, and it's been answered. For me, is just the balance, getting that balance of the carbon nitrogen ratio, and obviously starting off with the right material like our leaves and doing the big mix. Before I would be layering in the bins themselves, and what I'd find, it was clumping. It was just too much. So I think my questions have been answered. I've just got to keep on it. That's it.
Getting that first one that you build in really mixed up as much as you can is going to prevent that clumping, and is also going to help it to break down even, because if you have clumping, or if you put a layer of, say you put a layer of leaves on and you haven't shredded those leaves up or mixed them in, they can actually form like a barrier. I'm sure you would have seen it before, a barrier.
Yeah.
And then what you have microbial processes happening above and below that, and the compost isn't a united whole. You need the whole compost pile to be one, and a really, really good compost pile, the temperature will be even all around it. But that's God's day.
Well, I'm learning, which is great, and I'm learning from some experienced people, so I'll just keep learning.
Right.
Now,
do you want to hang up on there, Ian, and we'll switch over to this one? So my battery is dying on my phone.
I'm going off here?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Go.
Carry on. I'm going to farewell you while Jess does the garden tour.
So why don't you just give us,
Jess does the garden tour.
Ian, can you give us just one last really good look at the compost setup that you have?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
I was going to turn this. Yep. Sorry, my video went off. Come on, start video. Sorry, there we go. Okay.
Do you want me to explain that?
No, we'll probably there. And then we're going to extend all the way to the other end. So that'll be about 30 bins by the time we're done. And it's kind of in a honeycomb style, so it's super easy to flip the bins.
Yeah, it's just easy to turn from one to the other, which is really good with the way that we've got it structured at the moment. The other concept that Richard came up with was putting some of the bins amongst the orchard as well, so it can catch the carbon. So that's
the leaves are catching the carbon, so they're using them in photosynthesis very quickly. Nice.
Correct. So that's our goal. That's our goal moving forward.
Right.
And that makes a good transition to our orchard. So this is the other area. Sorry, my camera keeps on cutting out. Yeah, you're all good. This is the other area of the farm. So these trees were planted October of last year, and it's a mix of citrus, feijoas, an apple, a bay, 2 hopeful avocados. So I suspect they'll be more for shade than for fruit, which is okay. They've done okay. I think the really dry summer has kind of taken its toll a little bit. You can see yellowing from my camera. There we are. Yellowing on the leaves. Compost, and has been added, as well as been well mulched. You can see kind of a good amount of mycelium coming on there, but and they are starting to recover a bit, I think, since we've gotten lots of rain and we have a wobbler irrigation system on. I think that's made a really big difference. If there's any advice on supporting our fruit trees, love to hear it. Ultimately the goal is to have our fruit trees and then create guilds around them. So doing a lot more interplanting. See, there is flowers, like we've added cosmos and calendula and marigolds. And then eventually I want to be adding in currants and Chilean guava and a lot of low story berries, and I have strawberries added in here as well. So create a really diverse little orchard. That's kind of the long-term goal.
Jess,
yeah.
Can you slow down and just give us a really good shot of that without movement, because we're struggling just to get a really good visual picture of it.
Maybe flip your camera around, Jess, rather.
Flip it around? Sure.
Yeah, just when you're showing us the garden, show us that, and then when we're talking to you, then you can.
Okay.
Okay. So Daniel, do you have any comments on the leaf, the colour of the leaf?
You were looking for was citrus, I think we were looking at, of
yeah.
before here. There can be a range of different things at this time of the year. It just depends on how long they've actually been looking at yellow. One of the things I'd be looking at with all of that mulch sitting there, particularly as it's got a very young sort of microbial system trying to develop there, is that we've probably got a lot of nitrogen drawdown. And one of the most obvious things that usually turns a leaf yellow is you start looking at nitrogen or magnesium, because that's what makes the chlorophyll. So that's actually what makes the plant green, and it's usually the lack of one of those two. And in this thing, I would first be looking at potentially, because of all of the because when you put wood mulch down, again, we're talking about something that's 300, 400, 500 to 1 carbon to nitrogen ratio, and the fungi can't do anything really with it unless it's grabbing hold of every piece of nitrogen it can get its hands on. So it takes a long time. So you can slow it down quite a lot by being sort of extra generous with mulch, unfortunately. That's part of aging the mulch as well. That we've actually allowed that process to start, and as I said, that's 2 or 3 months at a minimum of having it sitting in a pile, and then you can use it actually as mulch. If you just take fresh mulch, you often get that nitrogen drawdown problem.
How long have those? Oh, you go. How long have those trees been planted for, Jess?
So they are planted October.
Okay, so they're not actually that old. And what did you do to the bed beforehand?
So when Ian planted it, it's planted directly into this kind of so it's planted in the very sandy soil mixed with compost, a finished compost, and then has been mulch, like kind of done the mulch around to deal with our very, very hot temperatures that we get on the Bowling Green. So
they're just trying to get an interaction with their environment and build solid foundations into the soil web. And I guess if you've just planted them straight into that Bowling Green, that's going to take a while for the soil microbial life to build up there. Something that I'd suggest is abandon the mulch and get living plants there.
And that's what I'm definitely working towards, is getting more and more and more plants in there.
But just also, you can grow your veggies there. Get some oats from in there. Get cover crops in there. What you want is things that grow big, not low-growing things, because things that grow big, they're going to photosynthesize more, and they're going to feed the soil web around those trees. Obviously, So look, if you have a look at syntropic farming, what they do when they plant a food forest, so they'll plant a whole line of trees. There'll be 50 different species of trees. It'll be right through from the ones that are harvesting in the second year to the ones they're going to harvest from in 100 year. And in the first 2 years of their production, they actually just grow vegetables underneath the vegetables and long grasses. That's to get a harvest, but also the other main thing is to feed the soil web. So you can also experiment with growing nitrogen-based crops as well. But just cover it, man. There's many different diverse species and grunty plants. So and don't worry about the trees being shaded out at all, because that's not an issue. They actually like that to establish themselves.
That's what my instinct was to get as much plants in there as possible, and that's definitely what we're moving towards. So it's good to hear that from someone else.
But also, Jess, I think there's an opportunity to Daniel sells a really fantastic product called Step 2, which is full of all sorts of incredible microbes. You won't tell us what's in them, but what we do know is that's in them is mycorrhizal fungi. So actually dipping your plants into that before you plant them will actually also really accelerate getting your beneficials right in the root ball, not sort of coming down through the top. Is there anything else that you would add to that, Daniel?
We should probably quickly go over and have a look at your bed suite being created, garden beds. But one thought I had is that digging into that sandy layer, digging a hole, I'm assuming you then mix compost in, you know, as you planted it. Interesting enough, if it's a good quality compost, you know, that's got good biology present, and if everything is there, the sand, the fact that it's actually in a hole full of sand, especially for citrus, is of no limitation to that plant's ability to grow. Right? People have a real fear of sand, where sand is just yet, it's parent material that has yet to turn to clay. You know, it's broken down from pebbles down to sand, and there's really good examples of where they've taken pure sandy soil with no organic matter in it, added organic matter in the form of compost, and made sure they've got the full microbial network, and being able to grow plants as though they're in a beautiful sandy loam. So, or you've got everything there you need. What we tend to do is put in things that we don't need.
Nice.
But anyway.
That's really really good for the orchard. Okay, I'm going to turn my camera around and I can show you the various stages of our beds. I'm all learning. Sorry, just kidding. Nope, that's not going to work. Okay. So you'll see there's, at the very back, there's some ginormous beds, which I'm in the process of filling because they've totally sunk. Then in the middle, these are the most recently created beds. That's our field 2. And then this is our field that working on building up the beds. The story here is kind of definitely our learning. So initially there was that concern, like what you're talking about, Daniel, that the sand won't do anything, like it won't be helpful. So we got this giant tractor and it dug out those 7 beds, but tractors aren't very good at making very precise. Sorry, I'm not sure why my video keeps on stopping. Tractors aren't very good at making very precise beds. Ended up bigger, went and it dug out massive amount of the sand and topsoil, which is actually, the topsoil is good, it's totally fine. And those were filled with what we had, so it was compost, sand, because we need to fill it, and a lot of mulch. So they're very odd beds to grow in, which we know, and working on adjusting. You can see that those couple of beds are being filled, so that's with the topsoil that's mixed with compost. The next beds here, those are kind of that Jam Forte style, about 75 centimeter wide with 30 centimeter pathways, and those work really well for my ergonomics. Being able to walk, like reach over the beds, and that works really well for me. And those were cover cropped. Initially, we tried to use lasagna style gardening, but our compost was way too mulchy, so we just ended up mostly with just piles of mulch. So that didn't work very well either. Also, just more learning. So kind of cleared that up, though it's still pretty mulchy towards that end. But now starting to use the topsoil that's here, which is actually, it's decent. It's kind of a, oh, there we go. It's more of a loamy, like there's definitely some clay in there. It's actually pretty good. And building.
Can you show us that again, Jess? Can you actually show that to us and just hold on it for a second so we can actually see it?
Sure. Yeah.
And what you're saying is that this is actually what is there with the grass.
Yeah. Sorry, trying to hold this. There we go. Oh, I'm just finding my camera.
Not quite.
Not quite. Working on it. There we go.
Yeah, I mean, that colour shows a definite humus material in it. You don't get that sort of, I mean, it's a lot more than obviously just sand. So you've got a good deep rich colour coming through on that. It's interesting to looks like you've been solarizing. You've got an area of plastic off to the right at the moment. You're trying to solarize off the grass in another area to develop it.
That was a question, Jess.
Yes, it's frozen at the moment.
That's right. Yeah. So we're working towards, obviously these beds were dug up and they were mounded up. Yeah. And then in this area, I got myself some black tarps. So that's just being used to kill off the cover crop that I had here, with the idea of just being able to grow in the debris, ideally. And it's made a huge difference. So going from kind of our really dug out beds to mounded up beds that have still a little too much mulch in them, to having beds had no mulch at all, just cover crops and solarized, and the difference here is enormous. Down a little bit. Super easy to use.
I've got a question. You sent through some soil analysis, and one of them was standout different to the others and the information that was there. Yeah. Well, we can talk about, but one of them, which you called 055, is the sample name. Is that an area that hasn't had anything done to it?
Yeah, that would be the orchard.
And that was underneath the mulch?
Yeah. So that's with the least amount of disturbance to it. Yeah, the one that's labeled BB is the big beds. And that's, I think, one of the more wonky ones, really strange pH. Yeah.
It's interesting, and we can share them in a little while if people want to actually see the data, and we can talk about it. But essentially, all the samples look like you could have done one soil analysis, except for the one standout, which is in the orchard, which is different. All the other ones, essentially for all intents and purposes, are showing exactly the same results on the information. They're on the basic information there. So, yeah, anyway, well, we can talk about that a little bit more later. What I wanted to actually raise was, I remember right at the beginning, I think when I saw it, Ian showed me the first beds that you did, which you make those massive lasagna. They actually made these massive lasagna beds, which they spent many hours building up.
And then they dug them all out.
And I think at that stage, I was just trying to convince them then that basically all I felt they really needed to do, and it's hard for people to get their head around when thinking that they're on a bowling green full of sand, that actually all they need to do is put a 10 centimetre layer of compost, of good quality compost down, and actually go straight into that. Do no till.
Yeah.
And what I'd say from a termination point of view, I don't actually think solarization personally, it has a huge number of disadvantages for the soil life. You would be, in my opinion, better to terminate crops or grass using mulching in the form of actually mowing that area and mulching it. So a mulching mower is the perfect piece of equipment to have. You might have seen Chris at Earth Steward's version of that behind a tractor, which they use for flipping beds now. But Rodale Institute showed initial work on cover cropping before they went to the whole crimp rolling, the no-till organic system. They started with mulching, using mulching mowers. And so taking a piece of grass and actually just mowing it really short, so you end up with all of that debris basically mulched right down to a tiny particle, and then covering it, like if you're worried about weed aspects, covering it with a layer of cardboard, not a massive thick layer of cardboard, just a layer as thin as you can get it. Putting compost on top of that, no more than about 10 centimetres thick, you can actually generate a bed, no-till bed really effectively and very quickly. And I know it goes completely against an awful lot of what's been taught out there about double digging and lasagna beds and all those other various things out there. But actually, when you look at what you're starting with in a soil, in a basic soil that you've got there, although we haven't got all the information we'd like, it still pretty much says to me the same thing that we saw at Kai Cycle. is you really don't need to add a huge amount to that to actually have a very good growing condition. And if we can do that all without tilling the soil, we're going to start very quickly with that first lot of compost as a great inoculum for the microbial system. And that's essentially, basically what the Soil Food Web research from Dr. Lane Ingham, is talking about now for years. It's very different to what we've been taught to do, but it's certainly, I think, the way to go forward.
What are your thoughts on that, Jess? Do you have any questions? Because obviously, I remember when we were first told we weren't going to be digging our garden beds. I have this beautiful memory of Levi's face, and it took us quite a lot of getting our heads around to shift. But I think that Levi would be able to share with you how successful that is, and I'll get him to do that in a second after you've had a chance to ask your questions around what Daniel's just proposed.
Yeah, that had actually been my original plan, but we didn't have any finished compost, so it was kind of going, okay, well, let's find another way of doing this where we can still move forward and keep on going. As our compost is doing pretty well now, like we're hitting our strides with compost, which is really exciting. And I think it's like we're going to expand to more beds. Like this is not the limit. There's going to be more. Right now we have 27. My plan is to have about 50. Like we have so much space. We're going to keep on expanding. And by the time we have a lot of compost, I just want to put the cardboard down, put the compost on top. That's the ultimate goal. Just don't have the resources yet.
Yep, fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, the key to it, I think it's one of your questions, is the things growing back, the roots are regrowing, and the only thing I'd say to that is the only roots.
Yeah, when I'm flipping beds.
Yeah, so the first question is what is regrowing, and then the second question is how high are you cutting them, because most things, like you're getting a haircut at the barber, and you got like number 2, number 1, and then you've just got bald. You want to be doing bald, and then putting something
so that's
into
like my greens and stuff that I'm cutting below the soil surface, and then that gets covered, but then it's still coming back. So I was like, I wonder if anyone has any tips for
what's coming back. What greens?
The lettuce, like just different kinds of lettuce, spinach. They just really want to grow when I don't want them to grow, but when I want them to grow, they're a little more stubborn.
Beets and lettuces, you have to get quite a low cut into the soil.
Yeah, okay, that's what I'm doing. So I'm thinking it might just be figuring out how far to go.
And how soon are you actually, like when you're harvesting that, how quickly are you actually getting in there and planting again? Because I suspect that if you've got a lot of competing, because I mean the root system will go on and survive, the microbes will keep the root system alive in the soil without any leaves on it. Because if nothing else comes along to feed them carbon, they will do their damnedest to get that thing to grow again. But if there's something planted right next to it growing, usually they'll leave that root system alone largely and start feeding or working with the root system that's alive next to it.
Usually I plant right away, but I'm direct seeding though.
That's the problem.
That's probably your problem in regards. It's taking the soil just doesn't have patience in regards to waiting for your seeds to germinate and get going. It needs carbon on a continual basis. So, but no, we understand the limitations, but I think that at the moment that would mean that if you're going to direct seed it, I would suggest that the only way around it is to pull the whole plant out, break that bed, direct seed it. As soon as you go to transplants like Levi's doing, OMG and that sort of stuff, I think you'll find the problem just disappears.
We're planning.
It worked really well for exactly those reasons, because you've terminated a plant, and even if you haven't done the best job of doing it, exactly what Daniel says, you put in a mature transplant. The moment you plant that, especially if all those transplants, you inoculate them and then you whack them into the ground, as soon as that thing's cut, all those microbes will just go, hang on, this plant's got vigorous growth, feeding me way more sugar. I'm going to go to that one, and they'll form a canopy and shade it out.
It's
Nice.
really interesting actually to see how well
shade it out.
a plant will grow next to a dying root system. So when you've actually taken the plant off, there's an existing root system there. There's examples they talk about. I mean, I hate commercial forestry in this sense, but they do talk about the second generation of trees will establish so much faster than the first generation, because there's this massive network in the soil of these root systems, and as quickly as you can after they've felled those trees to plant the new trees in alongside it means they literally leap into, and their growth can be absolutely astronomical, exponential gains, because there's that existing root system they can tap into. And it's like this, it's just, the difference is absolutely huge. So, you know, that's the end goal, I guess, is to work around some of these teething issues that you have.
Yeah, I mean, we're so new. Like, we've only been here for 8 months. So there's still, like, we've done a lot in a short period of time. And it's so helpful to have this call now, when we're kind of going on to our next stage and getting the tunnel house and kind of doing all that type of stuff.
Right.
What I was going to ask you to do, Jess, because we've got 10 minutes more, and I think when I was looking at your garden beds, you've got a particular sort of quite a organised way of planting into them. But I think there's a real opportunity for both Daniel and Levi to have a conversation with you about biointensive planting and also polycropping. So can you have a look, give us a look at what you're doing in your garden beds, and let's have a conversation about the possibility of that. And the reasons why that would be good to do. Yeah,
so there's a bit of a mix. In some of these early beds, it's just, you know, 2 rows of beets. Then I'm trying to do a bit more mixing up, where this is a rainbow silver beet with carrots on the side. And then I think this bed is spring onions in the middle with a little gem lettuce on either side. So trying to improve density, because right now it is a little thin, but I'm kind of getting used to how the soil grows.
And then what about you had some carrot, some coriander and stuff around behind you there.
Yeah. So these are
spinach. So where was your
carrot bed?
Yeah. See, I would have done 5 rows of carrots there. I've done another one through the middle and another 2 on each side.
Yeah, and that's this is the first time planting this. I think you had mentioned in your talk about how better the beds perform. Like, this is the first planting in here, but the next planting will be even better than this because it's had that living root in it. So I've been kind of cautious about planting too heavily until I kind of know how they're going to do.
No, you want to plant as heavy as possible to start off with, to feed the soil system, because ideally, when it's fully grown, you like, and how I do it is I plant things right to the very edge of the rows, which you actually find you'll get amazing growth on because they get the most sun. But also the idea for OMG for me is planting onto the edge of the rows, and I actually want my vegetables, their leaves, to be going into the path. So the path is there. I don't have to see the path. I know where the path is. Yeah. But ideally, you want to be seeing no path space, because whatever you can see with your eyes, there should basically be a leaf there. But I'd be looking at doing at least 5 rows of most things.
Yeah. But you wouldn't be doing it all of carrots, right?
Nah. Carrots are a little bit different, but even with the carrots, you can get a fast crop in beneath them. Carrots, radishes is a classic one, or carrots and lettuce is another one that a lot of people use. Carrots and spring onions go really well.
Actually.
But basically, with the carrots germinating, you've got about I'd say 7 weeks. Depends on when you do it, but you've got over a month. Yeah, you've got close to 2 months before they start shading everything out. So you can do a fast crop to fill that space in between then. But really, just you want to be pumping it full of things. as fast as possible. Yeah, and
Totally agree. The fastest way to get soil to actually become soil and function as soil is through photosynthetic activity. So the more plants, you know, the more photosynthesis, and the more food that's actually going in the soil to feed the system. So yeah, it's kind of just about density. I don't think, to a certain degree, you know, too many plants shouldn't be a worry. Not enough is a much bigger problem. Because then something's going to fill that space, which is usually weeds.
Which is usually weeds. Yeah, I'm spending a lot of time weeding.
So one of the things that came out of the visit that we did to my garden was that again, I've got lots of beautiful mulched plants, and I don't have a commercial garden, but I have a very productive garden. But and I'm also dealing with drought, and so one of the things that has kind of become clear to me is that I'm about to start sowing clover, not grass, but multiple species of clover into my garden beds. I obviously have volunteer oregano, but I think the big key here in terms of the climate change ready farming practices is a massive rethink, and what it's encouraging us to do is to look at photosynthesis capacity, because that's where the drawdown is, but actually that's also, it's producing sap, and that sap's been flooded into the soil system to feed carbon into the soil, to feed microbes, and then microbes are then producing waste that's then feeding the plant. So our first thing is as much photosynthesis as possible, and the diversity of that photosynthesis. And if we've got mycorrhizal fungi, when we're actually creating a network across the entire garden that's not actually slowing down at all in our paths, and we're starting to build a massive amount of resilience.
Hey, I don't know if you want to have a quick talk through those soil reports. We got time to do that?
We have, it's 4:57, but I'm certain that we probably can go over a few minutes, because I'm sure that Jess really wants to know this information.
So what I'm going to do is, I should be able to, the easiest thing to show you what I mean, so I'll try and share the screen. Okay, no, I can't do that. Catherine, are you able to share my screen?
I'll just check.
Because it says host disabled to share screen. Normally can.
Does that help?
I'll try again. Yes, okay, we're good. So this should work. This just lets everybody know what I'm talking about in regards to what's going on here. I'll just try and make these a bit bigger. So hopefully you can see a report on both the left and, hang on, why has that come up there? That's annoying. Hang on. So what I'm trying to show, if my computer will actually play ball. Wow, that's amazing. How well it doesn't work on Zoom sometimes. So Jess, what I'm showing you is at the moment is BB53 is the sample that you've got there.
Yeah.
And what we're looking at is a soil analysis that's telling us just pH, effective cation exchange capacity, the measurement unit that was utilized, which is grams per milliliter, an Olsen phosphorus sulfate. And then basically this is all about cations. This last thing says cations and base saturation. But essentially these two reports between cations and base saturation is actually talking about the same figure, because the 64% calcium base saturation is actually derived from the exchangeable calcium figure. So, you know, you utilize, but there's a few other figures that come into that calculation. Interestingly enough, one of those is actually carbon and the other one's effective exchange capacity, to work out what the base saturation figure is using this exchangeable calcium figure. That's a quick run through to basically what we're missing is a huge amount of information. It's telling us that you've got reasonable levels of calcium, slightly excessive in magnesium in that sample, but massively in excess of potassium, which I suspect if we had a carbon figure to look at, it would tell us that we've got an enormous amount of probably what is undigestibilized or non-soluble carbon. as opposed to what I've got in front of that now, is what we would normally be looking for as far as data. So we've got the cation data that you had and the base saturation data, but on top of that, we've also got a whole lot of trace element information.
Oh, yeah.
And then right at the top, what we've got is, we have the pH and effective exchange capacity, but we also have hydrogen saturation, which is critical to understand base saturation and the carbon cycle in the soil. But even more important, we've got nitrogen, carbon, organic matter, various different forms of nitrogen tests so we can understand what's actually happening. Also, that tells us about microbial balances in the soil. And even when we look at phosphorus, what we've got is the other tests only showed Olsen phosphorus, which actually isn't a particularly useful phosphorus test for a whole range of reasons. Because malic phosphorus, we can relate to how that soil's suitability to for mycorrhizal fungi to thrive in that soil. But without that malic 3 phosphorus test, we don't have we can't convert Olsen phosphorus into that figure. And the last one here is also total phosphorus, which is telling us, again, about what the amount is actually available for the microbial network to absorb or actually process. So yeah, we've got, like I said, there's 5 soil tests you sent through. One is based on soil that is obviously underneath your fruit trees, which is what I'm showing now. Which you can clearly see is different from the soil analysis because we've only got 2% potassium. So that was essentially what was there. But the interesting thing from that basis is that the 4 other tests all could have been 1 sample. Right. So what I'm saying is, if you did 1 test in this situation, you would have 1 which would be your beds and 1 which would be your orchards. So you needed 2 tests. But if each test actually had the complete information, the amount of money that you would have spent would have been basically the same, more or less, but you would actually end up with a huge lot of useful information. Where unfortunately, we've now got 5 tests which tell us virtually nothing from the point of view of we can guess what the other things say, but we can't really make any recommendation of what you actually might need. We would have to basically guess as to what that would be. So I'll stop. Is anybody got any specific questions about these? Otherwise, I'll stop the share and we'll go back to.
I think we're at 5:03 right now. Jess, have you seen the masterclass 1 and 2?
I think I've seen the first one. I have to go back and I have to have a look at them.
I think that you will find it really, really useful, particularly one around the parent material, and also Daniel does some looks at the soil tests, but we will do another masterclass specifically on soil tests. I also really highly recommend you watch the one this evening, which is going to be on photosynthesis capacity and how to work with the leaf of plants.
There was
I
another
think
couple of questions.
Wrapping it up. What was that, Levi?
I was saying there was another couple of questions that we could cover pretty quickly. You had a question about foliar feeding, Jess?
Yeah.
Are you doing that at the moment?
No, I'm not doing it at the moment. So I guess it's when should I be doing it, I guess,
So we do it every week, once a week, early in the mornings, on a morning with ideally no wind. We feed biologic, step 3 and step 4 in alternation. I put a bit of BAM in there as well. And we do that to the whole garden, all the vegetables, especially the young seedlings. It's very important to focus on feeding your plants that are this big, because we want to ensure that they get off to a healthy start. And if we nourish them in that part of their life, you're most of the way there to having a really healthy crop. Do you have a foliar sprayer?
We did. It broke, but
Yep.
I know how to. Yeah, I know how to use it. So I think
Yep.
I'll just have to
So you
replace
want
that.
as fine a mist as possible, and
Yeah.
you want to get the coverage over the whole plant. So the leaves, the stems, everything. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask was about your uneven germination. What are you doing when do you have like a shade cloth that you put over the seeds when you direct sow them? Do you have a material?
I have the little hoops. You can see them. It's gotten very cold in the past.
Yeah.
Are you
15 minutes.
Are you inoculating your seeds, Jess, before you sow them?
No, I haven't been. Though that's something I think,
Yep.
especially after
Right.
we've been talking, something I've been thinking about.
Yeah, it's really interesting in propagation, actually, Levi. I'll just throw in there that we found that, like, we stopped using all sorts of breeding hormones years ago and started using trichoderma-based fungi, and we got far better propagation
Oh, yeah.
out of using beneficial organisms, a special trichoderma, which is where what you're using at the moment with the network, with the mycorrhiza and the trichoderma, but really good at stimulating germination, root development, that sort of stuff. So
that'd be fantastic. Okay, I will look into that.
You've got those hoops, Jess, but what's the material that you're at? Are you laying the material down over the bed, over the soil?
No, I tried.
Yeah.
I did one bed of carrots where I didn't cover it, and one bed that I did cover them with just like burlap sacks, but I didn't find any difference in germination. If any,
So the majority.
Oh, you went mute.
Levi's muted himself.
Levi, you've gone mute.
Yeah, he can't hear us. I don't know what's going on there.
Levi, you've gone mute.
What he's talking about. Yeah, there we go.
I'm getting a phone call.
Yep. Aaron, Levi.
I was going to say that we use shade cloth. Majority of market gardeners in the country will do that, and we lay that over the bed, and then you water it in, and that basically keeps moisture levels very even, prevents it from bird strike. And then once the seeds are up, then you pop it over the cloches.
Ah, right. Okay.
Yeah, and I think you'll find that's also raising things like humidity and cooling the temperature in summer, so stopping it from drying out quite so quickly.
Yeah.
And I think potentially if you use that white fleece stuff that often you see over, I don't know what's on your plates exactly, but you've got there's various different covers that you can use that'll actually raise the temperature and as well. Anyway, that you're right, having it actually contacting the soil at that first stage. I think you'll find burlap sats probably tend to keep things a bit too sort of wet and cool because they're quite thick. That really thin material that Levi is talking about, which is just laying on the soil,
which we do have some.
Different. Yeah, so I'll give that a try anyway.
Okay, thank you for that. That's really handy.
So Jessica, I'm hoping that this was a really interesting hour. We're really totally inspired by what you're doing. What you're doing is absolutely fabulous, and we can't wait to see more of the farm during the rest of the week while you do your Instagram takeover. But also just really want to thank you for stepping into becoming a farmer and become part of these early farms, urban farms that are popping up around New Zealand, which are inspiring other people to step into the space. And I'm really excited about the greenhouse, and I'm sure that you will have more questions when you come to that stage, and there are lots of people in the community who can help you. So really use the WhatsApp channel to ask those questions. Thank you very much for being part of this. I have to say, Levi, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on this team. It's wonderful to see you stepping into a mentoring role. You have come on such an incredible journey over the last 3 years since I've known you, and you're a wonderful teacher, a wonderful, generous teacher. And also, Daniel, thank you once again. We, you are enabling this New Zealand community to really, step up into becoming highly skilled practitioners, where we are creating the possibility of vocational work for people in this urban farming space to address food security and local jobs. I really encourage anyone who is watching this to join us tonight at 7 for our masterclass, and to go back and use the archive as a resource for teaching yourself. And please reach out. We're really thrilled to have you as part of the community.
Thank you so much for having me on today and for this week. It feels really great to be part of this community, and I'm just really excited to see where it's going to go. It's just up from here.
Welcome, guys. It was really good to see the progress that you're making there, Jess. So keep up the good work, and yeah, just sing out if you need any information.
Cool, thank you.